What's up guys, and welcome to another Sm.I.E video. So today I want to talk about a topic that's kind of important in the IT world, and that is labbing. I'm gonna get into a couple things like if and why labbing would be necessary, and how do you go about getting that kind of stuff done, right? So let's get to it. So labs, what exactly are we talking about here? Well, essentially a lab is just a space that you can test various vendor devices or vendor equipment and services that you can probably get from some kind of service provider. Now the next question would be, why would something like that be necessary? Well, in labbing, what you're essentially doing is you are gaining hands-on experience with that technology, whichever technology it is that you're going to be testing. And that's important, especially to persons who may just be starting out in the field, because it gives you this valuable experience and understanding that you can leverage in your search for employment, right? And then for persons who are already in the field, it also gives them that same kind of valuable experience and understanding in the technical management and operation or deployment of these technologies that they're working with. Kind of helps them to work out the kinks. I mean, how do you get better at anything? You have to practice, right? And this is exactly what a lab allows you to do. It allows you to practice. So essentially, labbing is beneficial for everybody. Now, the next question is, how do you go about doing this? How do you go about setting up a lab environment? And this is where it gets kind of sticky. And this isn't necessarily because it's hard or anything like that, but what's most often a problem is that sometimes people are only exposed to like one or two options, so they kind of have tunnel vision in that they don't know of the other options that are available, and then those one or two options, they might look at them and go, oh no, this is out of my reach, I'm not able to do this, I'm not going to be able to actually set this up. For example, if we start with the simplest and probably most straightforward way to build a lab, which would be to buy the equipment that you actually want to test. That may be the most straightforward and simplest way, but it might not necessarily be the easiest way, and that has a lot to do with cost. Now that being said, there are ways to keep the cost down with that kind of method, with going ahead and buying the equipment. And generally that's usually buying used or refurbished or second-hand equipment. Alright, so check this out. Let's say jump on my computer here and I go to Amazon.com because I'm going to look for a couple devices that I might want to put into my lab, right? Let's say I'm going to search for a Cisco device, right? I search for a Cisco 2911 router. Now, I know this is an old ISR series router from Cisco, but it's still very, very good for labbing, right? It has all of the Cisco iOS features and everything. Now, so I bring up the Cisco 2911 router. Now, there are a couple of options here. I'd say a couple of options for a couple of $100, low, a couple hundreds, to this is almost $900, and that doesn't include taxes and everything. And if I go back to the main Amazon page and let's say I do another search, or I continue along the line of the search. Oh wait, this is the option that I clicked before. All right, let's go back. All right, look at this option, $11,632 for this one, right? But then if you notice, they have different prices as well for used devices. Like, come back here, see, it starts from $3,970 used, right? This one down here starts from $349 used. Like, there are a number of options. Then you have other devices, 2811 integrated services router. That's also a good router for labbing. Starts from $108. Like, these are pretty good options. Now, let's say I contrast that with, let's say eBay, right? Let's go eBay and search for the same thing and see what kind of options we get. Cisco 2911 router. Right, let's see what eBay says. Boom, look at that, $95, less than $100 for a used 2911 router. I mean, it's coming from Kingdom, and there's an additional shipping cost that's like $125, but that's still a good price. 200 and what's that, $220. That's still a good price. There's still some decent options here that you can find on eBay, depending on where it's coming from, for that type of router. And then you can have a number of other different devices that you can search these particular mediums for, that you might find at lower cost as well, that you can use in your environment. Suppose you don't want 2911 router because maybe it's too big for your space, and you want, let's say, 876 router, Cisco 876 router, which is a pretty good SMB type router from Cisco. It's a much smaller router as well that has all of the features. There you go, look at that, 1166 used from Germany. You could buy this and the shipping cost is pretty low. So there are a number of options out there that you can utilize even in buying the equipment to get low prices. So we know that straight up buying the equipment might be the more expensive option, but clearly there are a couple of options there that we can utilize that will allow us not to break the bank when we're going for buying the actual equipment. Now, of course, there are some tech that you won't be able to get very low, and inevitably, depending on what you're trying to learn, the physical tech is gonna be a must. So how you get that tech is definitely something that you're gonna want to look into. Now, before I go on, I want to kind of impress upon you that there are different types of labs, or you can set up labs in different types of ways. It really depends on what you're trying to learn. If you're trying to learn something that's more of an infrastructure-based technology, then you're probably going to look into designing a lab that has a lot more physical devices, or a larger physical device component to it. And of course, we know that that can be a little bit more difficult to achieve, albeit a lot of physical devices in today's IT landscape can be virtualized, but we'll get into that shortly. On the flip side, if you're trying to learn something that's a little bit more software based, there may be more options than you are actually aware of. You might actually have a few more options that don't involve you procuring any kind of equipment or much equipment, and it might be a little bit faster to get started with that kind of lab environment. Now, I make this distinction simply because that, as simple as it is gonna influence the direction you take in creating your lab environment. That being said, another way that you can actually get your lab space is to rent it. There are a number of online resources that allow you to rent compute and storage space for like $60 or $70 a month. You know, fairly low costs in most cases. Like, for example, if I jump on Google again and I do a search for rent a server online, right? There are a number of options that will come up that offer you the ability to rent server space. So let's click on one of them. Dedicated servers in Canada. All right, let's click on this and see what comes up. So it gives you a number of options here on server costs that you can rent. And this is basically just compute and storage space that you're renting from some provider, like a private cloud provider online. And these are the kind of costs that you're looking at monthly. Now, if you want to lab something for a month or, for a short while, you can choose one of these options. Basically, what happens is these guys, they just give you the infrastructure and you do whatever you want to do with it. You build out your software-based lab, you test your software, etc. Then there are the more cost-effective tools or cost-effective methods with virtualization tools like GNS3 or Vmware Workstation or VirtualBox or Vmware Esxi, just to name a few. Now, I use the term cost-effective here loosely because while a couple of these may actually be free, some features might not be available for more than a set period, like 30 days, 60 days, a set trial period. if you don't have the purchase version like with VMware Esxi. But like I mentioned, the trial period is usually a good 30 or 60 days, which is a fairly decent amount of time if you're looking to put some immediate focus into whatever it is that you are testing. And even when the trial period is up, there's always the option to recreate the environment and start the testing period over. I'm just saying. Now, I'm not going to get into specific details about the virtualization options that I just mentioned because there are a lot. And there are a bunch of videos out there explaining what they are and how to use them, and they talk about what they're capable of and all of that stuff. But I am going to talk about a couple of them, which are the main ones that I use. And the ones that I'm going to get into are Vmware Workstation and Vmware Esxi. Now, these two tools are excellent for labbing. Similar to the other tools that I mentioned, what these tools do is to allow you to create virtual deployments of physical devices, thereby creating whole virtual network environments. Basically, what this means is that you can use these tools to deploy things like Windows or Linux servers in a virtual space, and they actually function like the physical computer or the physical server. Or you can use them to do things like deploy a physical router or a physical not physical, but it's a virtual version of a physical router or a virtual version of a physical firewall, and they function like the physical router and the physical firewall. And once they're deployed, you can connect to them virtually, physically, kind of a physical into a virtual connection, and they're gonna mimic your actual physical network or become a part of your physical network. So then it allows you to end up configuring your virtual networks just like you would your physical network and interlink the two. And there's a whole lot that you can do with these two solutions. The reason why I mentioned these two specifically is because not all of the ones that we mentioned before has this kind of functionality. Like, for example, GNS3 focuses more on virtualized network infrastructure like routers and firewalls. So in other words, like, each of these tools have their strong points and weak points. Now, you can imagine any tool that is able to do something like this is going to require a lot of resources. Not necessarily for the tool, but more so for the infrastructure that you intend to simulate. What that means is whatever device you intend to install this software on, these tools, it's probably going to need to be a bit beefy specs wise. And that all depends on how heavily you intend to be simulating any kind of vendor device or vendor equipment. Now, both VMware Workstation and VMware Esxi, while they function similarly, are actually used differently. Workstation is an application that you can install on your laptop or your desktop PC on the operating system itself, and it functions like your regular application. So usually Windows or even Mac, you can install this kind of application in Workstation in. And there are two different kind of flavors. You have Workstation Pro, which is the professional version that you have to pay for, and the other is Workstation Player, which is the free version. Now, they pretty much do the same thing, but as you would expect, there are some caveats with Workstation Player, but it does allow you to get much of the same that you want to get done. Esxi, on the other hand, works more like an operating system. So you would install it like you would install Windows on a laptop or a PC system. It's installed directly on the hardware and it functions as the underlying OS. Same principle applies here though. Paid version, lots of features. Free version, limited features. However, with Esxi, you get to try the paid version or the full features of the paid version for a period of 60 days. Now, there's a lot you can do here. You can simulate whole networking devices like routers or firewalls, or you can simulate whole computer systems like Windows OS or Linux or whatsoever. Let me give you a quick look. So this is VMware Workstation Pro. This is what VMware Workstation Pro looks like. Well, this is version 15.5 of VMware Workstation Pro. They're up to version 16 right now. But this software, essentially what it does is it allows you to create that virtualized deployment of if it's a PC or if it's a router, whatever it is, if it's a firewall, whatever it is that can be virtualized and function like a physical device, you can create it in here in Workstation Pro and create a whole virtual network, a whole virtual environment that functions like your physical environment and also connects to your physical environment so that you can use it. And it's pretty simple. You know, you click create a virtual machine once you log in and you get on the main screen, and you can either create use their typical settings that they want to use, or you can custom set your settings for whatever virtual machine you want to create. So if you're let's say you're going to build out a Windows server, you can set the RAM that you want, you can set the hard disk storage that you want, you can set all of that kind of stuff. Now mind you, you are going to need the ISO image, that Windows server image, or Windows 10 or whatever version of Windows you're installing, or if it's Linux or whatever it is that you're installing, you're going to need that ISO image to actually copy in where it asks for the installer disk image so that you can continue with the install and then create that virtual deployment of this Windows server or whatever. And you just run through the process. It's going to ask you a number of questions about networking, the type of network you want, if it's a bridge network, if it's a NAT network, all sorts of stuff. You go through that process and then you set up your server. When it's done, it's going to look something like this. You're going to see a server over here under my computer or shared VMs, and this is the interface. You can log in directly into the server here once you pour it on, and it will show you all of the specs of your server, everything that you put in. You can log into your server, or you can even possibly log into your server through terminal methods like remote desktop or SSH, depending on the type of server that you build and so on. This is what you can do in VMware Workstation. Now you can do the same thing in Esxi. Let me show you that. Alright, now this is what VMware Esxi looks like. Now I'm on the main page, the login page, because I already have it set up in my environment. So I'm just going to log in and give you a look at what I have installed on this particular Esxi server. Let me log in. Alright, so this is pretty much what it looks like. First thing that I'm going to see is the information on the host, which is the physical server that I built out. And this is just a server that I built, guys. This is something that, you know, ordered the parts on Amazon and just built a server. It has a Ryzen processor in there with six cores, has 128 gigs of RAM. You know, that's just my server specs. And I installed Esxi on this server as the operating system. Now, this allows me to do a whole lot. So if you take a look, then you can see all of the virtual machines that I've already built out within this system. And then I can create another virtual machine just as easily. And the process is similar to what you did in Workstation here. Select create a new virtual machine, give it a name, specify all of the specifications that I need on it. I just put something in here and just click next, just so I can show you. And when guest OS family, let's say it's going to be a Windows server, let's say it's going to be server 2016, click next. I can choose from my storage and give it amount of hard disk space that I want to give it, and set a number of other specifications. It's saying it's great, but you know, all of that stuff, I can set all of that stuff up in here. This is what VMware Esxi allows you the capability of doing as well. So pretty powerful tool, both VMware Esxi and VMware Workstation. Now, both those tools are very powerful, and they're just a couple of the options that you have. But there's a couple more things that I want to talk to you about. One of the last things is applications that are available from the product vendors themselves that can actually help you to lab. Now, a number of these major product vendors, they have their own tools that kind of help you to simulate environments based on their their equipment that they sell, right? And through this simulation, you're now getting the opportunity to learn about these technologies, not just the vendor equipment, but it also helps you to learn the technology itself behind, or the protocols themselves behind how the technology or how the equipment functions. For example, Cisco has a tool called Packet Tracer. If it's the first time that you're hearing about this and you've never seen it before, this is what it looks like. The whole layout to Packet Tracer is pretty simple, I think, and pretty straightforward, right? And it's very, very easy to use. With Packet Tracer, you can drag and drop devices that allow you to create entire networks, right? Packet Tracer is available through Cisco's site, so you can create an account on Cisco's site or create an account on Cisco Network Academy, and that will allow you to download and sign into and use Packet Tracer. But just to give you an example of how simple it is, you can drag and drop a device, any device. You want to create a network router to router connection, boom, you drag and drop two devices, boom, this is an automatic connection, so you don't have to select the type of connection that you need. Boom, now you're connected with two devices. This is simulating a physical connection from one router to another. Then you can bring up the router interface, the CLI, the Cisco CLI interface, and look, it looks almost exactly like what you'd see when you log into a Cisco router for the first time. Boom, there you go. Go into enable mode. You can run all your commands on these devices like you'd run on a regular Cisco router. Show run, show, this is a favorite Jeremy Chura command, show IP interface brief. Shows you all the IP interfaces that are on the device and what's assigned to them and so on. Yeah, you can use Packet Tracer to build your networking knowledge, to build your experience as an engineer, a network engineer, and to just kind of understand the information much more fully through labbing. Like, Packet Tracer is an extremely powerful tool. Now, even though Packet Tracer is a very powerful tool, the simulation is kind of limited, meaning that you don't get the full version of the Cisco iOS on the Cisco devices within Packet Tracer, or even the computers that are simulated in there, like the laptop or the desktop computer that might be simulated, or the Wi-Fi or the firewall that might be simulated. You don't get the full experience like you would logging into a computer or even into a virtualized environment, like if you log into VMware or stuff like that. I mean, those things give you the full iOS experience or the full experience of a physical device, but you don't really get that in Packet Tracer. Even so, it still is an extremely powerful tool. And speaking from experience, when I just started in networking and I started learning about networking and how, you know, getting to understand the functionality and the technology even more, Packet Tracer was the main go-to tool that I used when I didn't have access to the physical devices or other tools like GNS3, or when it just couldn't give me exactly what I want, because even tools like GNS3 are limited, right? You don't have all the devices simulated, and sometimes the devices that you do get simulated in those environments don't give you all of the functionality that you want. Like at the time, if you wanted to learn MPLS or you wanted to learn VRF or whatever functionality you wanted to learn, maybe you wouldn't necessarily be able to do it on that because you needed more than the software was able to give you, or your resources were able to put into the software for it to give you that environment for you to work in. But Packet Tracer was the go-to tool. You could actually go to that to get a lot of that stuff done. Yo, that was a lot to go through in such a short space of time, and we've barely even scratched the surface. There's so much more on labs and their uses and just getting a lab set up for your own development. There's literally just a bunch of information out there for anybody who wants to actually get started on this, to set up a lab environment. And I'd encourage anybody who's just starting out, or even if you've been in the field for a while, look at all the information that's out there and everything that's available to you, and see what's best for you to help you to get started in setting up your lab environment. I mean, in my environment, I gradually built and added equipment over time, and my servers that I use, that I virtualize with VMware, they're servers that I built off of Amazon. You know, I bought a motherboard, I bought a processor, you buy RAM, you buy hard disks, even external SAN storage, you buy all of that stuff. You can buy that on Amazon, and you can set up your own home lab, and it simulates the kind of environment that you would have in a corporate network environment, the kind of environment that's out there in the work environment. And this is super beneficial, especially for persons who are starting, as well as for persons who are in the field already. For those of you who are starting, leveraging this experience in that kind of environment in your job search will help you to impress upon those persons that you're talking to that, look, you know, you have an understanding of how this environment is set up, how it works, and you are able to function adequately in this environment. You can talk about your experience in setting up this kind of environment and leverage it with your potential employer to make a good impression on your employer, that you or your potential employer, that you actually know what you're doing, and give you the opportunity to get the job. But in order to do that, you definitely have to get started on setting up your lab space. So I definitely recommend looking at everything that's out there and seeing what works best for you. Hopefully this video has given you enough information and enough of an understanding as to what's there, so you can go out and look at all of the information that exists and make that decision as to what's best for you, and to get started on your path to building your lab environment. And that's it. Thanks for sticking around with me throughout this video. If you enjoyed the content, please feel free to give me a big thumbs up. And if you have not already, please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that notification bell so that you don't miss any of the content that we provide. So that's it for me today, and I will catch you guys on the next one.